Welcome to Sleep Easy, where we invite you to unwind and let go of the day's busyness. I'm grateful you've chosen to spend this quiet moment with us. Tonight's story is called Whispers of the Sea, a journey into the heart of the ocean's timeless mysteries. In this tale, we follow Ethan, a man who has always felt the pull of the sea, but never truly understood its power. One fateful evening, he finds himself aboard a mysterious ghost ship, guided by a starry compass that leads him toward an uncharted island. Along the way, he encounters ancient forces of nature, whispers from the depths, and a storm that may change the course of his life forever. Now, as you get comfortable, take a slow, deep breath. Let the weight of your body relax into the surface beneath you. With each breath, feel your muscles soften, your mind quieting, ready to drift into a peaceful sleep. Let the gentle rhythm of the ocean's whispers guide you as the story begins, drawing you into calmness and rest. Ethan stood at the edge of the cliff, gazing out at the sea. The horizon stretched before him, a vast expanse of deep blue water blending seamlessly with the sky. The air was thick with the scent of salt, and the gentle waves lapped against the rocks below, creating a soothing rhythm that echoed in his chest. It was the kind of day that felt as though time itself had paused, holding its breath before something unknown. The small seaside village of Bristol Bay was quiet. The fishermen had already returned with their catch, their boats bobbing gently in the harbor, tied securely to the docks. The locals were going about their business, the chatter of the market mixing with the sound of seagulls overhead. Yet, despite the peaceful scene, Ethan could feel a strange unease in the pit of his stomach. He had been feeling it for days now, a sense of impending change, though he couldn't quite place it. The sky was clear, but there was a heaviness in the air, as if the world was bracing itself for something. Ethan's fingers tightened around the weathered railing of the cliffside lookout. The storm was coming. He could feel it in his bones, though the weather said otherwise. The wind was calm, the sea undisturbed. Still, Ethan knew better than to trust appearances. He had always felt a deep connection to the ocean, even as a child. Growing up in Bristol Bay, he had spent countless hours on its shores, watching the waves crash against the rocks, letting the sea breeze tousle his hair. But lately, it had been different. The sea seemed quieter, more distant, as if it was holding something back. It whispered to him in ways he couldn't understand, pulling him towards something, yet leaving him with a sense of uncertainty. The calm before the storm was always the most unsettling. The stillness made everything feel out of place, like the world was suspended in time, waiting for the moment when it would all break loose. "Are you daydreaming again, Ethan?" The voice startled him, pulling him from his thoughts. He turned to see Maggie, a childhood friend, walking toward him along the narrow path that led down to the village. She had always been the practical one, the grounded soul who could bring him back to reality when he got lost in his thoughts. "I suppose I am," Ethan replied, his voice carrying a tinge of unease. "I've just been thinking about the sea. Something feels off, like it's waiting for something to happen." Maggie raised an eyebrow and looked out at the horizon. The sea's always been unpredictable. You know that better than anyone. Her gaze softened. You've been restless for weeks now, Ethan. It's not just the ocean. It's you. What's going on? Ethan hesitated, unsure of how to explain the strange feelings that had been growing within him. He had tried to ignore them, burying them beneath the daily rhythm of life in Bristol Bay. But now, standing here on the edge of the cliff, with the sea stretching out before him, the restlessness was undeniable. It gnawed at him, a constant presence in the back of his mind. I don't know, he said finally. It's like something is calling to me, but I don't know what. I keep hearing whispers. In the waves, in the wind. I can't explain it. Maggie studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, with a shrug, she said, well, maybe it's just your imagination. You've always had a deep connection to the ocean. It could be that you're picking up on something different this time. But whatever it is, don't let it take over your mind. It's just a storm brewing, Ethan. Nothing more. But Ethan wasn't so sure. He felt this shift in the air, a subtle change that seemed to hum beneath the surface of the world. The calm before the storm was more than just the weather. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to begin. As Maggie turned to leave, her footsteps crunching on the gravel path, Ethan stayed where he was, his eyes still fixed on the sea. In the distance, a dark cloud began to form on the horizon. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but Ethan knew it would grow stronger. And when it did, it would be more than just a storm. It would be a turning point. He could feel it in his chest, a deep, restless pull. Whatever the storm was, it wasn't just nature at work. It was something larger. And Ethan had the strangest sense that it was meant for him. The days following Ethan's encounter with Maggie felt like they had been submerged beneath the weight of an unseen tide. Though the storm had not yet come, the air around him seemed thick with anticipation, as if the world was waiting for something to happen. The sea, usually a place of solace, had become a source of unease. Ethan had always found comfort in the rhythmic crashing of the waves, the familiar whisper of the tide as it rolled in and out. But now, the ocean felt distant, almost as if it was calling to him from far away, beyond the horizon. It was late afternoon when Ethan found himself at the docks again. The village had settled into its usual rhythm, with the fishermen returning from their daily catch and the locals preparing for the evening. But Ethan was restless. He had walked the shore in silence for hours, his gaze fixed on the ever-changing water. The tide seemed to be in flux, one moment calm, the next, a swell of restless waves, rolling towards the shore with an urgency he couldn't understand. He leaned against the weathered wooden railing of the dock, his fingers tracing the rough surface of the boards. The sea stretched out before him, endless and vast. But even as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting the world in golden light, he felt the oceans pull more strongly than ever. It was as if the water itself was beckoning him, calling him towards it. Ethan turned his head sharply at the sound of footsteps behind him. It was Captain Elias, the old lighthouse keeper, making his way down the pier with a slow, deliberate pace. His face was as weathered as the lighthouse itself, his eyes sharp and knowing despite the years that had etched deep lines into his skin. "You're listening for it, aren't you?" Elias asked, his voice low and gravelly, carrying a quiet weight that made Ethan shiver. Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "I don't know what it is, but yes. It feels like the ocean is trying to tell me something. I don't understand it." The old man stepped beside him, his gaze turning to the sea. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sounds of the village seemed to fade away, and all that remained was the quiet rush of the waves, the distant cry of gulls, and the soft hum of the wind. "You're hearing the call," Elias said finally, his voice tinged with both sadness and reverence. "It's not just the ocean speaking to you, Ethan. It's something older. The sea has always whispered to those who listen closely enough. But only a few ever truly understand its language." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? What is it trying to say?" The captain glanced at him, his eyes sharp and knowing. "That's something you'll have to discover for yourself. The sea doesn't give its answers easily, and it doesn't always make sense. But it's calling you for a reason. And it's up to you to follow." "Follow?" Ethan repeated, his voice incredulous. "Where? I don't even know what it's saying." Elias' lips curled into a faint smile. "That's the first step, Ethan. Not understanding the call, but hearing it. The ocean speaks to those who are ready to listen, and it will guide you when the time comes. You must trust it, even when it doesn't make sense." Ethan frowned, his mind racing. "But how? How do I follow something I don't even understand?" "Sometimes," Elias said, his gaze distant as he looked out over the water, "it's not about understanding. It's about feeling. The sea speaks through your heart, not your mind. It's a feeling, a pull, an urge you can't ignore. And when you're ready, it will show you the way." Ethan's eyes turned back to the ocean. The gentle sound of the waves seemed to grow louder, and in that moment, he swore he could hear something more, a deeper hum beneath the surface, a rhythm that matched the beating of his own heart. His pulse quickened as the air around him seemed to thicken, heavy with the weight of the unspoken. Elias sighed, as though reading Ethan's thoughts. "It won't be easy, you know. The ocean doesn't just give its gifts freely. You must be willing to face whatever lies ahead. And that means more than just braving the sea, it means braving what you fear inside yourself." "What do you mean by that?" Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. Elias turned to him, his eyes dark with a depth of knowledge only time could bring. The ocean doesn't just test your strength. It tests your soul. It will show you things you're not ready to see, challenge you in ways you can't imagine. But it's the only way you'll find what you're truly seeking. A cool gust of wind swept across the docks, and Ethan shivered as it passed through him. He felt the weight of the captain's words settle deep within him, stirring something long buried beneath the surface of his heart. The sea was calling him, yes, but it was more than a mere invitation. It was a summons, one he could not ignore. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shades of purple and gold, Elias placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, his touch surprisingly gentle for someone so old and weathered. The sea will show you the way, Ethan. But it's up to you whether you choose to follow. And with that, the old captain turned and walked slowly away, his figure fading into the twilight as Ethan stood alone on the dock. The call of the ocean grew louder now, more insistent, a whisper in the wind that tugged at his very soul. For the first time, Ethan knew he could not ignore it. The ocean was calling, and it was time to answer. The days that followed were a blur of restless nights and long days spent staring out at the sea, waiting for the call to become clear. Ethan had tried to focus on his daily life in Bristol Bay, but it was as if the world had shifted beneath his feet. No matter how much he tried to distract himself, his mind always returned to the ocean, to the feeling of something waiting for him just beyond the horizon. Captain Elias had been right. Ethan could hear the call now, more clearly than ever. It came to him in the quiet moments, in the gentle hum of the waves and the whisper of the wind. It wasn't just a sound. It was a feeling, a deep, insistent tug in his chest, as if the sea itself was reaching out to him, beckoning him towards something unknown. It was late one evening when Ethan made his decision. He couldn't wait any longer. The time had come to follow the call, to discover what the ocean was trying to show him. And there was only one place to start, the lighthouse. The lighthouse at Bristol Bay had always been a mysterious place, standing tall and solitary on a rocky promontory at the far end of the village. Its whitewashed stone was weathered by salt and time, and its light, which once guided sailors safely into port, now flickered only occasionally, as if reluctant to illuminate the darkness. Despite its proximity to the village, the lighthouse had always felt distant, almost forgotten by the people who lived there. It was a place of solitude, and many of the villagers spoke of strange occurrences around it, of whispers carried on the wind, of lights seen flickering in the windows long after the sun had set. Ethan had never thought much about the lighthouse before. It had always been a part of the landscape, a distant landmark that marked the end of the world. But now, it felt different. Now, it felt like the place where everything would begin. He made his way along the narrow path that wound through the cliffs, the sky darkening as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air was cool and crisp, and the sound of the waves crashing against the rocks echoed in his ears. As he approached the lighthouse, he could see the faint glow of light spilling from the window at the top. The beam of the lighthouse swept across the sea in wide, rhythmic arcs, casting long shadows over the rocks below. Ethan's heart raced as he climbed the winding stairs to the top, each step bringing him closer to something he couldn't quite understand. The air inside the lighthouse was thick with the scent of sea salt and old wood, and the narrow, spiraling staircase creaked under his weight. At the top, he stepped into the circular room, where the lighthouse's great lens stood, its light casting strange shadows against the walls. And there, standing by the window, was Captain Elias. "You've come," Elias said, his voice soft but steady. He turned toward Ethan, his weathered face illuminated by the soft, flickering light. "I knew you would." Ethan hesitated, his mind racing with questions. "Why am I here?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What am I supposed to do?" Elias looked out at the sea, his gaze distant, as if searching for something beyond the horizon. "The lighthouse was built to guide lost souls," he said quietly, "to help those who are adrift in the dark find their way home. But the ocean calls to those who are ready to listen. It's calling you, Ethan. You've heard its whispers, haven't you?" Ethan nodded, his throat tight. "I don't understand. I feel it, this pull, this yearning. But I don't know what it means. I don't know where I'm supposed to go." The old man stepped closer, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "The ocean doesn't speak in words, Ethan. It speaks in feelings, in the things you can't explain. But it will show you the way. You just have to trust it." Ethan's eyes widened. "But how do I know where to go? How can I follow something I don't understand?" Elias smiled faintly. "Sometimes, it's not about knowing the destination. It's about following the path, even when it doesn't make sense. The ocean will show you the way, but only if you trust it and trust yourself." A cold gust of wind swept through the open window, and Ethan shivered. The ocean below was wild now, the waves crashing against the rocks with a force that seemed to echo the turmoil inside him. He felt a deep sense of longing, an ache that pulled him toward the water, toward the unknown. "It's time," Elias said, his voice low and serious. "The lighthouse can guide you, but only so far. Beyond this point, it's up to you. You must choose whether to continue your journey, to answer the call of the ocean. The sea will not wait forever." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know if he was ready, but something inside him told him that this was the moment. The lighthouse, with all its mystery and solitude, had brought him here, but it was only the beginning. The real journey lay beyond, where the ocean's whispers would lead him into the unknown. Elias placed the ancient compass into Ethan's hand, its surface cool and smooth against his palm. "Take this. It will guide you, but only if you listen. The sea has its own rhythm, its own way of speaking. You must learn to hear it, to trust it." Ethan nodded, his grip tightening around the compass. "I will," he said, his voice steady with a determination he hadn't known he possessed. "I'll follow the call." With one last look at the old captain, Ethan turned toward the open door of the lighthouse. The wind howled outside, the waves crashing violently against the cliffs below. But as he stepped into the night, he felt a strange sense of calm settle over him, as if the ocean had already begun to speak in a language he was beginning to understand. The lighthouse, with its fading light and ancient walls, was behind him now. Ahead of him lay the sea, vast, mysterious, and calling him forward into the unknown. The night was alive with the roar of the ocean. The wind howled through the jagged cliffs, whipping across Ethan's face as he descended from the lighthouse and made his way down the narrow path that led to the beach. The waves crashed against the rocks below, the sound deep and powerful, as though the sea itself were calling to him. He gripped the ancient compass tightly in his hand, its cool surface grounding him as his heart raced with anticipation. The storm that had been threatening for days was finally here, the sky darkened by thick clouds that stretched across the horizon like a shroud. The wind grew colder, and the first drops of rain began to fall, splattering against the earth. But Ethan didn't hesitate. The sea had called him, and now, with the compass as his guide, there was no turning back. As he reached the water's edge, the waves surged higher, their white-capped peaks gleaming in the dim light. The sea was wild tonight, as if it were testing him, challenging him to enter its depths. Ethan stepped forward, feeling the chill of the water lap against his boots. He could taste the salt on his lips, the very essence of the ocean filling the air around him. He stood there for a moment, staring out at the endless expanse of water. The horizon was swallowed by the storm, the waves growing more violent with each passing moment. It would have been easy to turn back, to return to the safety of the village, to the life he had known. But he couldn't. He could feel the pull, the magnetic draw of the sea, tugging at his very soul. With a deep breath, Ethan made his decision. He stepped into the surf, his legs sinking into the wet sand, and waded into the water. The coldness of the ocean shocked him at first, the frigid waves tugging at his legs as if they were trying to drag him under. But he didn't resist. He trusted the ocean now, trusted that it would guide him. The compass in his hand grew warmer as he held it steady, the needle spinning wildly before coming to a sudden stop. It pointed straight out to sea, toward the heart of the storm. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't falter. The sea was calling to him, and he was ready to answer. He waded deeper into the waves, feeling the water rise higher with each step. The wind howled, and the rain stung his skin, but he pressed on, his gaze fixed on the endless dark water before him. The ocean seemed to open up before him, its vast expanse stretching out as far as the eye could see. The storm was fierce now, the waves crashing with fury, but Ethan felt no fear. There was something calming about the chaos, something that told him he was exactly where he was meant to be. The sea was no longer an unknown force, it was a companion, a guide, leading him forward. As he swam further out into the deep blue, the light of the lighthouse faded behind him, swallowed by the dark night. The only sound now was the roar of the water and the rhythmic pulse of his own heartbeat. He focused on the compass, its needle unwavering as it pointed toward an unseen destination. It was guiding him, though he couldn't yet understand why. The waves grew even more unpredictable as he moved farther from the shore, their surges now feeling more like powerful hands pushing and pulling him in every direction. But the compass remained steady, and he clung to it like a lifeline, trusting it as Captain Elias had instructed. Suddenly, the water beneath him began to change. The dark, stormy sea grew calmer, the waves less violent, as though they had suddenly become aware of his presence. The coldness of the ocean seemed to recede, replaced by an eerie warmth that radiated from below. The water around him felt alive, as if the sea itself had acknowledged him. Ahead of him, through the darkness, a faint glow appeared, soft, but steady. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a trick of the storm, a reflection of the lighthouse light still lingering in his memory. But as he swam closer, the glow grew stronger, brighter, until it illuminated the water in an ethereal, almost otherworldly light. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. Before him, rising from the deep, was an island, small but undeniably real. It was bathed in the strange glow, the light coming from the water itself, and as he approached it, he felt an overwhelming sense of recognition. This was it. The place he had been searching for, though he had never known where it was or what it would look like. The island was shrouded in mist, its jagged cliffs rising from the sea like ancient sentinels. At its center, Ethan could see the faint outline of a structure, something old and weathered, standing tall against the storm. The light seemed to pulse with an almost hypnotic rhythm, and Ethan knew, deep in his bones, that he had found what he was meant to discover. The sea seemed to guide him closer, the waves becoming gentler, as though urging him to reach the island. With one final push, Ethan made his way to the shore, his legs aching from the long swim. He staggered onto the rocky beach, his heart racing with excitement and wonder. The glow from the water illuminated everything around him, casting a surreal light over the landscape. As he stood there, panting and drenched, he couldn't shake the feeling that something ancient and powerful was watching him. The island was alive with energy, the air thick with the presence of something beyond his understanding. And then, in the distance, he saw it, a figure standing by the structure at the center of the island, watching him silently. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. He didn't know who or what it was, but he knew he had reached the place where his journey truly began. The air on the island was thick with an odd sense of stillness, as if time itself had slowed to a crawl. Ethan stood frozen on the rocky shore, his body still soaked from the swim, his breath shallow with anticipation. The strange, pulsing glow from the water had dissipated as he had climbed ashore, but the eerie light still hung in the air like a fog, painting everything in shades of soft blue and violet. It was as if the island existed outside of ordinary space and time. Before him, the figure at the center of the island stood motionless. It was tall, cloaked in shadow, and appeared to be waiting for him. Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. the pull of curiosity and fear battling within him. He had no idea who this figure was or what it meant, but something deep inside told him that this was the moment he had been waiting for. The island was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. The cliffs rose sharply, their jagged edges framed by thick fog that swirled around the rocks like restless spirits. Between the towering cliffs, strange stone formations jutted from the earth, their surfaces worn smooth by the passage of time. The land was untamed, wild, and ancient, yet there was an unmistakable sense of order to it, as if the island had a consciousness of its own, watching him from every angle. He took a tentative step forward, his boots crunching against the sharp stones. The figure didn't move. It simply stood there, its form flickering in and out of focus, as if it wasn't entirely of this world. Each time Ethan blinked, the figure seemed to shift slightly, its features unclear but undeniably present. "Who are you?" Ethan called out, his voice shaky but steady. The figure did not respond at first. Instead, there was a soft echo, a whisper of sound that seemed to come from all around him. The wind stirred slightly, carrying with it a faint melody, a haunting tune that seemed to resonate deep within Ethan's chest, as though it were awakening something inside him. He took another step forward, the ground beneath his feet firm but uneven. The echoing song seemed to pull him in, its rhythms aligning with his heartbeat, as if the island itself were speaking to him. With each step, the sound grew louder, more distinct. And then, just as suddenly, the music stopped. "Ethan," a voice said, clear and calm, though it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. He froze. The voice was not familiar, but it was warm and comforting, like the voice of someone he had known all his life. It was a voice that seemed to understand him without needing words, a voice that reached deep into his soul and stirred something ancient and forgotten. "Who are you?" Ethan repeated, his throat dry. "What is this place?" The figure before him began to move, slowly and deliberately. As it stepped forward, its form became clearer, more defined, though its features remained shrouded in shadow. It was a tall figure, cloaked in what appeared to be an ancient robe, its hood drawn low over its face. There was an air of both power and serenity about it, as though it existed between two worlds, one foot in reality, the other in something beyond. "I am the keeper of echoes," the figure replied, its voice resonating in the space around them. "And this is the island of echoes." Ethan blinked, his mind struggling to comprehend the words. "The island of echoes?" The keeper nodded, a faint gesture that seemed to ripple through the air. "Yes. This island is a place where the past and future meet. It is a place of memories, of things lost and things yet to come. The echoes you hear are the voices of those who have come before you, those who have walked this path and left behind their stories. It is said that the ocean chooses those who are ready to hear the echoes, those who are ready to understand." Ethan's thoughts raced. "I don't understand. Why me? Why did the ocean call me here?" The keeper tilted its head slightly, as if considering Ethan's question. The ocean calls to those who have forgotten their true purpose, the keeper said softly. It whispers to them, leading them to places like this, where the past and the future converge. You are not here by accident, Ethan. You were chosen. The ocean has awakened something in you, something deep within your soul that you must rediscover. Chosen for what? Ethan asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. I don't understand. I'm just a fisherman from Bristol Bay. The keeper's shadowed face seemed to soften, and for the first time Ethan felt the weight of something ancient pressing down upon him. No, Ethan. You are more than that. You have always been more. The ocean chose you because you are connected to its deepest truths. You have the ability to listen, to hear the echoes of the past, and to shape the future. But first, you must remember who you are. The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Ethan felt a sudden surge of emotion, something between fear and longing, as though the keeper's words had unlocked a door inside him that he hadn't known existed. The echoes of the island seemed to grow louder now, the faint melody of the forgotten voices blending with his thoughts, blurring the line between what was real and what was not. What do I need to do? Ethan asked, his voice trembling. The keeper stepped forward, raising a hand to gesture toward the heart of the island. Follow the path, Ethan. The echoes will guide you. Trust the rhythm of the sea and the whispers of the past. When the time comes, you will understand. The keeper's words were like a soft command, pulling at Ethan's heart. He looked toward the center of the island, where the strange structure stood. It seemed to beckon him, a silent invitation to uncover the mysteries that lay hidden within. The air around him seemed to shimmer with possibility. With a deep breath, Ethan nodded. I'll follow the path. The keeper's form seemed to blur for a moment, as if fading into the very air itself. You are ready, Ethan. The journey has only just begun. As the keeper's presence dissipated, Ethan turned toward the path that led deeper into the island, the echoes of the past whispering in his ears, urging him forward. The wind carried with it the faintest melody, and Ethan knew, deep in his bones, that this was only the beginning of something much larger than he had ever imagined. Ethan's footsteps echoed in the silence of the island as he followed the winding path deeper into its heart. The mist that hung in the air seemed to cling to his skin, wrapping around him like a shroud, muffling the world. The faint melody of the echoes, the song of those who had come before, was still in the air, a soft hum that seemed to vibrate through his bones, urging him onward. The island was vast and wild, and yet, it felt impossibly still. The wind had died down, leaving only the soft sound of his breathing and the crunch of his boots on the uneven ground. The path he was walking on was narrow and overgrown, the edges lined with thick, twisting vines and moss-covered stones. The landscape around him was both beautiful and foreboding. Towering cliffs rose on either side, their jagged peaks cutting into the mist-filled sky, and the sea, distant yet ever-present, roared in the background. Every few steps, Ethan glanced at the compass that had guided him thus far. Its needle pointed steadily forward, unwavering, despite the strange forces at work on the island. There was something calming about the compass's reliability, something that made him feel as though he wasn't truly alone. The path seemed to stretch on forever, but eventually, it began to curve, leading him toward the sound of the sea. The dense foliage opened up, revealing a hidden cove that appeared almost as though it had been carved out of the rock by some ancient force. Ethan stopped at the edge of the cove, his breath catching in his throat. The sight before him was unlike anything he had seen before. The cove was small, almost circular, surrounded by high cliffs that formed a natural wall. The water within was calm, its surface a mirror of the sky above, reflecting the swirling mists and the faint glow that still lingered in the air. There was a strange lightness to the atmosphere here, as if the very air had been infused with magic, a sense of timelessness that hung heavy over the place. The rocks that lined the shore were smooth and polished, their surfaces glistening with a strange, almost iridescent sheen. The sea here was quiet, the waves barely lapping against the shore. And in the center of the cove, surrounded by the water, was a large stone archway, an ancient structure, weathered by time, but still standing strong. Ethan felt a pull toward the archway, an almost magnetic force that tugged at his very soul. It was as if the island itself was calling him to this spot, as though this was the place where something important would happen. The echoes in the air grew louder as he stepped closer, their haunting melody now a symphony of voices, overlapping and intertwining, a chorus of memories. As he reached the edge of the water, he hesitated. The sea was calm here, but there was an undeniable sense of something ancient and powerful beneath the surface. The stone archway seemed to beckon him, its edges worn smooth by centuries of wind and water, yet it held a strange sense of purpose, as if it were a gateway to another world. Ethan looked around, half expecting the Keeper of Echoes to appear, but the island was silent now, save for the soft whisper of the sea. He reached out and touched the cool stone of the arch, feeling the weight of its history beneath his fingertips. It was then that he noticed something else. Carved into the stone at the base of the arch was a symbol, one he didn't recognize. It was a swirling pattern, like a spiral, with lines that seemed to shift and move when he looked at them. The symbol seemed familiar, though he couldn't say why. He ran his fingers over the carvings, tracing their path. As his hand passed over the spiral, he felt a sudden rush of energy, like a pulse beneath the stone. The ground trembled slightly, and for a moment, the air seemed to shimmer, as though reality itself was bending. Ethan pulled his hand away, startled. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the water in the cove began to move. The stillness of the sea was broken as ripples spread outward from the base of the arch. The air grew heavier, charged with an unfamiliar energy, and Ethan watched in awe as the ripples grew stronger, the water rising as if responding to some unseen force. The spiral symbol on the arch began to glow, faintly at first, then more brightly, casting an ethereal light over the cove. The water seemed to come alive, swirling around the arch as though it were being pulled by an invisible current. The echoes, too, grew louder now, their voices rising in a crescendo, filling the space with a haunting song. Ethan stepped back, heart pounding in his chest. What was happening? The island had always been strange, but this felt different. The air was thick with power, and the water seemed to be reacting to something beyond his understanding. Then, without warning, the sea surged forward. The water around the archway swelled, forming a column of liquid that reached up toward the sky. The light from the spiral symbol grew brighter, illuminating the entire cove in a blinding glow. Ethan shielded his eyes, feeling the heat of the light against his skin, but as quickly as the surge began, it stopped. The water fell back into the cove with a soft splash, and the light from the arch faded, leaving behind a strange, lingering silence. For a long moment, Ethan stood in stunned silence, unsure of what he had just witnessed. The symbol on the arch had stopped glowing, but the air around him still felt charged, as though something had shifted within the island itself. The echoes were quiet now, but their presence lingered, like a distant memory just out of reach. The cove had returned to its quiet state, the water still and calm once again, but Ethan knew that what had just occurred was no accident. He had uncovered something ancient, something that had been waiting for him. The island was speaking to him, guiding him forward, but the path ahead was still unclear. With a final glance at the arch, Ethan turned and began to make his way back to the path. The echoes were softer now, but still there, urging him onward, toward whatever lay beyond the cove. The island was vast, and he had only just begun to understand its mysteries. Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him as he made his way back along the narrow path, leaving the hidden cove behind. The air still hummed with an otherworldly energy, and he couldn't tell if it was the island itself that was alive with anticipation, or if it was something deeper within him that had awakened. The echoes, the mysterious symbols, the shifting waters, they all seemed to converge into a single point, a path he had no choice but to follow. As he walked, the landscape around him began to change. The mist that had once surrounded the cove had begun to lift, revealing more of the island's rugged beauty. Towering cliffs stretched above him, their edges dotted with patches of thick, dark forest. The sound of the sea, distant at first, grew louder as he approached the western edge of the island. The rhythmic pulse of the waves crashing against the rocks echoed in his ears, but there was something else, something different, a soft melody that hung in the air, carried on the wind. It was a song, faint but unmistakable, like a lullaby sung by a distant voice. The melody was haunting, beautiful in a way that made his heart ache. Ethan paused, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The wind seemed to carry the song from across the water, its notes drifting like a whisper from the depths of the sea. For a moment, he thought it might be his imagination, the echoes still lingering in his mind. But as the melody grew clearer, he knew that it wasn't a trick of the wind. This was real. He followed the sound, drawn toward it like a moth to a flame. The path ahead led down toward a rocky shoreline, and as he neared the water's edge, the song grew louder, more distinct. It was a voice unlike any he had heard before, soft and melodic, yet with a strength that seemed to come from deep within the ocean itself. The words, though foreign, felt familiar. They resonated in his chest, as though they spoke to some primal part of him. Ethan reached the water's edge and looked out across the churning sea, the waves crashing against the rocks with a thunderous roar. But as he scanned the horizon, the song continued, a delicate thread weaving through the storm. The melody seemed to be calling him, pulling him toward the water. And then, just as he was about to step forward, he saw her. At first, he thought it was a trick of the light, a ripple in the water, a shadow moving beneath the surface. But then, through the foamy waves, a figure emerged. At first, it was just a flash of pale skin, a flicker of movement beneath the water's surface. But then, slowly, she rose from the sea, her figure gleaming in the dim light, her long hair flowing like a curtain of seaweed. She was a mermaid. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He had heard the stories of the sea's mythical creatures, the merfolk, who were said to sing songs that could charm sailors and guide them to their fates, but he never thought he would encounter one himself. She was everything the legends had promised and more. Her skin was a pale blue, almost translucent, and her eyes shone with the color of the ocean, deep and endless. Her tail shimmered with iridescent scales, reflecting the fading light of the storm. The mermaid's song filled the air as she rose higher, her voice carrying on the wind, wrapping around Ethan like a gentle embrace. The melody was even more beautiful up close, each note a delicate weave of sorrow and longing, joy and mystery. It was a song that seemed to speak directly to his soul, to something inside him that he couldn't quite explain. "Who are you?" Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper, as if speaking louder would break the spell. The mermaid paused, her eyes meeting his. There was a deep knowing in her gaze, as if she had been waiting for him. She tilted her head slightly, her lips curving into a soft, knowing smile, though she said nothing at first. Instead, she raised her hand, gesturing to the sea behind her. The waves seemed to calm, as if the very ocean was responding to her call. "I am Lysandra," the mermaid said, her voice soft but clear, like the ringing of a bell. "And you, Ethan, are the one the ocean has chosen." Ethan stood frozen, unable to take his eyes off her. "Chosen? Chosen for what?" The mermaid's eyes darkened, and her expression became serious. "The ocean speaks to those who are willing to listen. It calls to you because you have a purpose. The path you walk is one that has been walked before, but not in the same way. You are not here by chance, Ethan. The island, the echoes, the water, they have all been leading you here." Ethan shook his head, trying to make sense of her words. "I don't understand. I'm just a man from Bristol Bay. I don't have any special purpose." Lysandra's smile was gentle, but there was a sadness in it, too. It is not always the ones who believe themselves special who are chosen. You have a connection to the sea, one that you have forgotten. It is not too late to remember. The island holds the answers you seek, but you must be willing to dive deeper than you ever have before. Ethan took a step forward, his heart racing. What is it that I need to remember? The mermaid's song began to swell again, rising like a wave crashing against the shore. You must listen to the echoes, she said, her voice becoming one with the melody. They hold the key to your destiny, and they will guide you to the truth of who you are. But be warned, Ethan. The deeper you go, the harder it will be to return. The sea seemed to pulse with energy as her words faded into the song, and Ethan felt a sudden pull toward the water. It was as if the very ocean itself was calling to him, urging him to surrender, to let go of the world he had known and embrace the unknown. Lysandra's figure began to shimmer, her body becoming translucent as the sea closed in around her. The ocean will guide you, but only if you are willing to listen. Trust in the song, and you will find your way. With one last lingering look, the mermaid disappeared beneath the waves, leaving behind only the haunting echo of her song. Ethan stood at the water's edge, his heart still racing, unsure of what to do next. But one thing was certain, the island was no longer just a place. It was a doorway, and the mermaid's song had opened it wide. The sea was quiet now, the haunting melody of the mermaid's song fading into the distance, leaving only the rhythmic crash of the waves against the shore. Ethan stood motionless at the water's edge, his heart still thumping in his chest. Lysandra's words echoed in his mind, repeating over and over like a song he couldn't forget. The ocean will guide you, but only if you are willing to listen. He had heard the song. He had felt its pull. But now, standing alone in the fading light of dusk, Ethan wondered if he had truly understood it. The ocean had spoken to him, called him to this island, but what exactly was it that he was supposed to find? The winds had shifted, and the air felt cooler, tinged with salt and mystery. He looked out at the horizon, the vast expanse of water stretching endlessly before him. The sea had always felt vast and unknowable, but tonight, there was something different about it. Something deeper, something waiting. The glow from the hidden cove still lingered faintly behind him, but the world ahead seemed to be shrouded in a thick fog. It was as if the island itself had turned inward, holding its breath. And for the first time since arriving here, Ethan felt the weight of something ancient, something old and powerful, pressing down upon him. Taking a deep breath, he began walking toward the water. The soft hiss of the waves met his ears as he stepped cautiously into the shallows. His boots sank into the wet sand, the coolness of the water lapping at his ankles. The ocean felt alive beneath his feet, the current gentle but persistent. As he moved further into the water, he could feel something else, an energy, like an electric current, pulsing just beneath the surface. It was a sensation that sent a shiver down his spine. He stopped, his feet sinking deeper into the sand. There was something out there, beneath the waves, calling to him. The pull was undeniable. He didn't know what it was, but he felt as though it was a force that had always been there, waiting for him to come. The water was clearer now, the moonlight cutting through the surface, casting an eerie glow on the sand below. Ethan squatted down, peering into the depths. The ocean was deceptively calm, its surface smooth and almost glass-like, but as he stared, he began to notice movement beneath the water. Shadows that didn't belong, shapes that flickered in and out of view, like something large and dark was lurking just beyond the reach of his sight. A pulse of energy shot through him, a feeling that the island and the sea were not two separate entities, but one. The very air around him vibrated with this connection. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the sensation faded. "Is it time?" Ethan whispered to himself, his voice swallowed by the sea breeze. He had no answer, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the next step was something far beyond his understanding. It was as if the island itself was alive, and it was beckoning him to dive deeper, literally and metaphorically, into its secrets. He didn't know why, but he knew what he had to do. With one last glance back toward the shore, Ethan took a deep breath, waded further into the water, and dove into the dark depths of the cove. The cold water surrounded him instantly, its pressure against his chest both exhilarating and suffocating. Ethan kicked his legs and began swimming deeper, the world above him becoming smaller and smaller until it was swallowed by the blackness of the ocean. He could no longer see the shore, no longer hear the land, only the sound of his own breathing and the rhythm of his strokes filled his ears. For a few moments, panic set in. The water was cold, far colder than he had ever experienced. His heart raced, and the weight of the ocean pressed down upon him like an unseen hand. But as he fought against the current, he realized that it wasn't the ocean that was threatening him, it was the unknown, the vast, unfathomable expanse of what lay beneath. Yet, in the midst of this uncertainty, there was also a strange sense of purpose, a knowing that he was doing exactly what he was meant to do. Ethan continued to swim, feeling the pull of something deeper. He had no idea how far beneath the surface he had gone, but the pressure was mounting, and the dark water seemed to stretch on forever. And then, just as he was beginning to think he couldn't go any further, he saw it, something glowing faintly in the distance, a pale blue light flickering like a beacon. He swam toward it, his strokes becoming more desperate as he realized he was running out of air. The light grew brighter with each passing moment, its radiance cutting through the dark water like a lighthouse guiding him towards something important. His heart pounded in his chest as he kicked harder, the sensation of weightlessness mixing with the urgency of his need for breath. Finally, his hand brushed against something solid. The ground beneath him was rocky, but there was something different about it, smooth, almost like glass. He reached out, his fingers brushing over the surface, and felt a surge of energy, warmth, like the pulse of a living thing. His breath came in ragged gasps as he clung to the rock, his eyes scanning the darkness around him. The blue light flickered again, now brighter, more tangible, illuminating a strange formation in the depths. The rocks were arranged in a circle, and at the center there was an object, a stone, smooth and round, glowing with an otherworldly light. It pulsed softly, sending out waves of energy that resonated through the water, vibrating through Ethan's entire body. He reached for it instinctively, his hand outstretched. As his fingers made contact with the glowing stone, a surge of power coursed through him, and the ocean seemed to come alive around him. The water rippled in response to his touch, the pulses of energy building until they were almost overwhelming. And then, a voice, not in his mind but in the water itself, spoke. "The secret has been found." Ethan's heart stopped. The voice was soft, like a whisper carried by the currents, but it was unmistakable. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. The answer to all his questions. The secret beneath the waves. But before he could process what was happening, the light from the stone intensified, and the water around him began to swirl. The ocean was no longer a vast, indifferent force, it was alive, it was aware, and it was shifting, changing in response to the stone's power. Ethan's world blurred as the current pulled him deeper, into the unknown. The world around Ethan spun in a blur of shadow and light as the ocean's current tightened around him. The blue glow from the stone pulsed fiercely, its energy expanding outward like ripples across a pond, drawing him deeper into the depths. The sensation was unlike anything he had ever felt before, a rush of power, of something ancient and vast, coursing through his veins. It was both overwhelming and exhilarating. For a moment, he lost all sense of time, his body weightless as the water enveloped him. The pressure of the ocean was no longer suffocating. Instead, it felt as though he was floating in a dream, suspended between worlds. The only thing that mattered was the stone in his hand, its light blazing brighter with each passing second. But then, as quickly as the surge had begun, it stopped. Ethan gasped, his breath cutting through the water. The force of the current released him, and he found himself drifting in the stillness of the deep sea, his heart pounding in his chest. The glow from the stone faded, and the eerie calm returned. The water, once alive with energy, was now eerily quiet, as if the ocean itself were holding its breath. For a long moment, Ethan simply floated, his mind spinning in confusion. Had he imagined it? Had the stone truly called out to him? Was there some deeper meaning in what he had just experienced, or was it a trick of the sea? And then, a sound broke the silence, a low rumble that echoed through the water. At first, it was so faint that Ethan wondered if it was just the reverberation of the ocean itself, the hum of the currents. But then it grew louder, a deep, thunderous growl that seemed to come from all around him. The water trembled in response, and for the first time since arriving on the island, Ethan felt a chill of fear creep down his spine. It was as if the ocean had changed, as if something had awoken deep within its heart. The rumbling sound grew louder still, and then, without warning, a violent shake reverberated through the depths. The water around Ethan swirled in wild patterns, and for a brief moment, it felt as though the very sea was going to tear itself apart. Ethan's heart raced. A storm was coming, but not one like any he had ever known. This was no ordinary storm, it was something far darker, far more powerful, something born from the deepest, most ancient forces of the ocean. The pressure around him increased again, and the water began to churn violently. Waves, unseen but present in the water, tossed him from side to side, their power overwhelming. Ethan struggled to keep himself steady, but it felt as though the very ocean was pulling him into its depths, its grip tightening with every passing moment. But then, as suddenly as the chaos had erupted, it stopped. The water stilled. The storm that had threatened to swallow him was gone. Ethan blinked, his chest heaving as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. The ocean had been wild, thrashing with energy, but now it was as if nothing had changed. The water around him was calm, almost unnaturally so, as if the storm had never existed in the first place. He floated there, suspended in the eerie stillness, his mind racing to understand the sudden shift. The storm had come from nowhere, and yet, it had felt as though it was meant to happen, as though it had been a part of something larger. The power that had surged through the water, the overwhelming energy that had threatened to pull him under, it was still with him, in his chest, in his very being. It was as if the island had tested him, pushed him to the brink, and then, just as quickly, pulled back. A warning. A challenge. But a challenge for what? The stone in his hand pulsed again, but this time, its glow was softer, more steady. It wasn't the blinding surge of energy it had been before, it was calm now, in tune with the stillness of the ocean around him. Ethan glanced down at the stone, his fingers curling around it instinctively. He could feel its weight, its power. But there was something else now, something in the stone's glow that felt familiar, as if it was calling him to understand its purpose. A ripple of understanding washed over him, clearer than any thought he had ever had before. The storm wasn't the end of the journey, it was part of it. It was a sign, a signal that he was on the right path, but it was also a test. The island, the ocean, even the mermaid, they were all watching him, guiding him, challenging him to go deeper. Ethan took a deep breath and steadied himself in the water. His pulse was still quick, but the fear had faded, replaced by a quiet determination. He was beginning to understand that this island, this sea, held secrets far beyond anything he had ever imagined. Secrets that had been hidden beneath the waves, waiting for someone to discover them. The ocean had shown him a glimpse of its power, but it had also shown him something else, its patience. It was not the storm that would break him, but his willingness to endure, to dive deeper into the unknown. It was a lesson, one he had to learn if he wanted to uncover the truth of the island. With the stone still pulsing gently in his hand, Ethan began swimming back toward the surface. The water was still, the violent energy of the storm now a distant memory. But as he swam, he knew that the storm had not been an accident. It had been a sign, one that he would need to remember when the true challenges lay ahead. As he broke through the surface of the water, gasping for air, the island came into view again, its cliffs looming against the night sky. The waves had settled, but the feeling of something immense, something waiting, still hung in the air. Ethan knew that his journey had only just begun. The storm that had threatened him was nothing compared to what lay beneath the waves, what lay hidden in the heart of the island itself. And if he was to uncover its secrets, he would have to be ready for whatever came next. The ocean had calmed, but Ethan could still feel the lingering pull of its power. The storm that had threatened to overtake him was gone, replaced by an unsettling stillness that seemed to wrap itself around the island. The wind had died down, the air heavy with the salt and mystery of the sea. Ethan swam toward the shore, his limbs moving automatically, his mind consumed by the events that had unfolded in the depths below. As his feet finally touched the rocky beach, he stumbled slightly, the cold water rushing over his ankles as he made his way out of the surf. The island stood before him, its silhouette now sharp against the moonlit sky, and for the first time since his arrival, he felt a strange sense of belonging. The island was no longer just a destination, it was a part of him, its heart and soul intertwined with his own. The stone in his hand, still warm and glowing faintly, felt like a beacon, a constant reminder of the journey he had undertaken. He turned it over in his palm, its surface smooth and cool, yet it thrummed with energy, like the pulse of a living thing. It was as if it was alive, reacting to the very rhythm of his heartbeat. Ethan stopped at the edge of the forest, looking up at the dark cliffs that loomed above him. His path had led him to this moment, to the discovery of something far greater than he had ever anticipated. The mermaid's song, the whispers of the water, the storm, it had all been a part of the island's call, a call he couldn't ignore. But now, as the night grew still, he understood that the journey was not one of mere exploration. It was a journey of the soul. The words Lysandra had spoken echoed in his mind, "The ocean will guide you, but only if you are willing to listen." It was no longer just a matter of following a path, it was about understanding the deeper currents of his own existence, of facing the truths that had long been buried in the depths of his own heart. A sudden, sharp wind gusted through the trees, pulling Ethan from his thoughts. He blinked, taking in his surroundings. The island seemed different now, as though the very air was charged with energy. The trees whispered in the wind, their leaves rustling like voices in a language just beyond his understanding. It was as if the island itself was waiting for him to make the next move. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a moment. The feeling of peace that had settled in his chest was a sharp contrast to the turbulence of the storm that had come before. Yet even in this calm, there was an undercurrent of something more, something that beckoned him to move forward, to seek what lay beyond the horizon. With the stone still in hand, he turned back toward the dense forest, its shadows stretching long across the ground. He had no idea where the path would lead, but he knew that he couldn't stay here forever. The ocean had shown him its power, its depth, and now it was time to uncover the next layer of its secrets. The journey of the soul was not an easy one. It was not about finding answers, It was about embracing the questions, about surrendering to the unknown. It was about the courage to face the darkness, both in the world and within himself. As Ethan stepped forward into the trees, the world around him seemed to shift. The air became heavier, richer with the scent of earth and salt. The ground beneath his feet felt different, as if the very earth was alive, responding to his presence. The stone pulsed once more, and for a moment, it seemed to glow brighter, casting a soft light through the darkening forest. The further he walked, the more Ethan felt the weight of something ancient pressing upon him. The island was not just a place, it was a living entity, and he was no longer just a visitor. He was a part of its story, and the journey of the soul he had been called to was unfolding with every step he took. The path before him narrowed, and he felt the pull of something beyond the trees, something calling him forward. The air was thick with the scent of salt and moss, and the sounds of the island, distant waves crashing against the shore, the rustling of leaves in the wind, faded into a soft, almost reverent silence. It was as if the island itself was holding its breath, waiting for him to discover what lay ahead. And then, just as the forest seemed to swallow him whole, he reached a clearing. It was small, tucked away among the trees, and at the center of the clearing stood an old stone structure, half hidden by the overgrowth. It was ancient, its surface worn by time, but there was something undeniably powerful about it. Ethan approached cautiously, the stone in his hand pulsing in time with his heartbeat. As he drew closer, he saw that the structure was covered in intricate carvings, symbols and runes that seemed familiar, as though he had seen them before in the echoes of the sea. The carvings twisted and wound around the stone, forming patterns that seemed to tell a story that beckoned him to understand. He stepped closer, placing his hand against the cool stone. The moment his fingers made contact, a surge of energy shot through him, and the ground beneath his feet seemed to tremble. The stone seemed to hum with life, its power awakening in response to his touch. Ethan could feel the connection, the link between himself and the island, between the past and the present, between the ocean and the land. The stone pulsed again, and this time Ethan didn't pull away. He let the energy flow through him, embracing the sensation as it filled him with an understanding that was both overwhelming and freeing. It was as if the island, the ocean, the mermaid, they were all part of a greater whole, a web of interconnected forces that he was only beginning to comprehend. The journey of the soul was not just about discovery, it was about transformation. And Ethan understood now that his journey was far from over. In fact, it had only just begun. The stone's glow faded, but the energy remained, still thrumming beneath his skin. Ethan took a deep breath and stepped back, his eyes now fixed on the path ahead. The island was calling him forward, urging him to continue on the journey. The answers were out there, just beyond the horizon, and it was up to him to find them. The island had revealed its secrets to Ethan in fragments, glimmers of truth hidden beneath the surface of the earth and the sea. He had followed the call of the ocean, delved into the depths, and felt the power of the island pulse through him. But as the stone's glow faded and the clearing fell silent, he knew that his journey had not yet reached its final destination. There was still more to uncover, and he was certain that the answers lay not on land, but on the sea itself. That night, Ethan sat on the rocky beach, gazing out at the ocean. The wind had picked up again, whispering through the trees behind him, but the air was warm and carried with it the familiar scent of salt and the promise of something more. The ocean before him stretched endlessly, its surface shimmering in the moonlight, as if inviting him to venture into its depths once more. He had made his way back to the shore after his encounter with the stone, but his mind was still reeling from the strange connection he had felt. There was something about the island, something about the water, that called to him in ways he couldn't quite explain. It was as if the ocean, like the island, was alive, watching him, waiting for him to understand its mysteries. The stone still pulsed faintly in his hand, its light barely visible in the moonlit night. Ethan had learned to listen to its rhythm, to understand its hum. It was a guide, a compass that pointed him toward the next part of his journey. And now, it was clear, he had to return to the sea. As if in response to his thoughts, the gentle waves lapped at the shore, calling him. Ethan stood up, brushing the sand from his hands, and made his way to a small dock where a weathered rowboat was tethered. The boat had been there when he first arrived on the island, a forgotten relic of a time long past, but it was sturdy enough to carry him across the water. Without hesitation, he untied the ropes and pushed the boat into the surf. The moonlight reflected off the dark water as he climbed in, the stone still resting in his palm. The waves were calm now, their movements languid and peaceful, as if they were waiting for him to take the first step. Ethan picked up the oars and began to row, the sound of the boat's wooden frame creaking with each stroke. As he paddled farther from the shore, the island seemed to fade into the distance, its towering cliffs dissolving into the night. The vastness of the ocean stretched before him, the stars above like a blanket of light that seemed to go on forever. The gentle rocking of the boat, the rhythm of the oars, and the soft lapping of the waves against the hull lulled him into a meditative state. For the first time since arriving, Ethan felt truly alone, alone with the sea, alone with his thoughts, and alone with the mysteries that lay hidden beneath the water's surface. But even in this solitude, there was a strange sense of peace, as if the ocean itself was guiding him, pushing him towards something he had yet to understand. The wind had begun to pick up again, and the water around him grew more restless. The waves, once gentle, now rolled with more force, their crests catching the moonlight in fleeting flashes of white. Ethan's grip tightened on the oars, but the boat remained steady, gliding smoothly through the growing swell. He couldn't help but feel that the sea was alive with purpose now, its movements deliberate and meaningful. The stone in his hand pulsed again, its light brighter now, casting a soft glow across the water. Ethan raised his eyes, scanning the horizon. The ocean seemed endless, but there was something ahead, a shape, a shadow, barely visible in the distance, just beyond the reach of the moonlight. He paddled toward it, feeling an urgent pull deep within him, as though the ocean itself was beckoning him forward. The waves grew higher, their crash louder as he drew closer. The wind held in his ears, and for a moment, he thought he saw something in the distance, something dark and looming, like the shape of a ship on the horizon. But as he got closer, the shadow began to take shape, revealing itself to be a large rock formation rising from the sea. Ethan stopped rowing, drifting toward the rocks, which loomed like ancient sentinels in the moonlight. The stone in his hand pulsed more rapidly now, its light flickering with intensity, as though it had recognized something in the rocks, a sign, a marker that he had reached the next stage of his journey. He pulled the boat close to the rocks and tied it to a nearby outcrop, then climbed carefully onto the wet stone. The waves crashed against the shore, sending salty spray into the air. The sound of the ocean was deafening, but there was something hypnotic about it, something primal that resonated deep within him. As Ethan climbed higher, he reached the top of the rocks, where a flat expanse of stone lay before him. And then he saw it, a symbol carved into the rock, worn by time but still visible in the dim light. It was the same symbol that had been etched into the stone in the clearing, the same runes that had called to him. The symbols twisted in complex patterns, and at the center was an image of the ocean itself, waves crashing against a shore. Ethan approached the symbol and knelt down, placing the stone in the center of the design. The moment it made contact with the rock, a brilliant light exploded from the stone, blinding him for a split second. When his vision cleared, he saw that the waves around the rocks had grown still, the water eerily calm. The light from the stone reflected off the ocean's surface, and Ethan felt the presence of something ancient, something vast, that seemed to envelop him in its energy. The voice that had spoken to him beneath the waves returned, soft but clear. The journey of the soul is never without trial. But through the storm, there is always a path. Ethan stood, his heart pounding in his chest. The ocean had spoken once more, not with words, but with the pull of its currents, with the light that had illuminated the night. He understood now, the sea was not just a physical force. It was a metaphor for the journey within, a reflection of the inner trials and transformations he had yet to face. As the light from the stone faded, the ocean returned to its quiet rhythm, the waves gently rocking the boat below. Ethan knew that his path would not be easy, but he also knew that he had been given the strength to continue. The ocean had revealed its power to him, and now he had to trust it. Trust that the journey, though filled with uncertainty, would lead him exactly where he needed to go. With one final glance at the rock formation, he turned back toward the boat. The night was far from over, and there was much more to uncover, both on the sea and within himself. The boat rocked gently beneath Ethan as he made his way back across the calm ocean, the light from the stone still faintly pulsing in his hand. The waves, once restless and fierce, had now settled into a peaceful rhythm. The wind, too, had softened, as if the storm had passed and the sea itself was holding its breath, waiting for something or someone. Ethan's mind buzzed with the events of the night. The symbol carved into the rock, the sudden flash of light, and the voice that had echoed through the stillness of the ocean, all of it felt like pieces of a puzzle he had yet to understand. But what he did know, with certainty, was that he had crossed into something ancient, something far older than the island itself. The ocean, the stone, the symbols, they were all connected in ways he was only beginning to grasp. As the boat drifted back toward the island's shore, the first rays of dawn began to break over the horizon, painting the sky with hues of gold and purple. Ethan could feel the change in the air, the subtle shift that heralded the arrival of a new day. But there was something different about this dawn. It wasn't just the beginning of a new day. It felt like the beginning of something much greater, something he couldn't quite put into words. He tied the boat to the dock once more, his feet touching the familiar sand as he stepped onto the shore. The island before him seemed unchanged, its cliffs still towering against the sky, its trees swaying gently in the morning breeze. But the air felt charged now, filled with the weight of something unspoken. The ocean had revealed a deeper layer of itself to him, but there was more still hidden beneath its surface, more that he had yet to uncover. Ethan's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind him. He turned to see Lysandra, the mermaid who had first guided him toward the island. Her silvery hair shimmered in the early light, and her sea-green eyes regarded him with a mixture of curiosity and something deeper, something almost ancient. "You've been to the stones," she said, her voice low, as if speaking to him was a ritual, a part of something larger. "I sense the change in the water. It is beginning, isn't it?" Ethan nodded, though his words caught in his throat. There was something in Lysandra's gaze that seemed to know everything he had experienced, everything he was beginning to understand. It was as if she had known this moment would come, as if she had been waiting for him all along. "The tide is shifting," she continued, her voice soft but firm. "And with it comes the knowledge of the ancient forces that lie beneath the sea. Forces that have been forgotten by time, but never truly gone. The island, the ocean, it is a place of power. But it is also a place of balance. And balance must be restored." Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. He had sensed the power of the island, the pull of the ocean, but he hadn't yet fully understood what it meant. Balance. Forces of power. Forgotten by time? His mind raced to catch up with Lysandra's words. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What is happening here? What are these forces you speak of?" Lysandra's gaze softened, and she took a step closer, her bare feet silent on the sand. "You are beginning to see, aren't you? The ocean is not just a body of water. It is a living entity, full of wisdom and ancient knowledge. The tides that carry the ships, the waves that crash against the shore, they are guided by forces older than the world itself. But those forces are fading. They have been forgotten by mankind, dismissed as myths or stories. But they are real, Ethan. The stone you carry, the symbol you found, it is a key, a connection to the deeper currents of the ocean." Ethan looked down at the stone in his hand, still glowing softly in the early morning light. It felt heavier now, its energy more intense. He could sense that it was more than just a stone, it was a conduit, a link to something far beyond the island, beyond the ocean. The ocean calls to you because you are the one who must restore the balance, Lysandra continued, her voice steady and sure. The stone is not just an artifact, it is a part of you. It is tied to your soul, as the ocean is tied to the world. The ancient tide, the forces that lie beneath the waves, they are awakening. And you are the one who will answer their call. Ethan's heart raced. His thoughts were a jumble of confusion and awe. He had come to the island seeking answers, but now it seemed the answers were far more complicated than he could have imagined. The ocean was alive, and he was somehow connected to it, bound to its ancient tides. But what did that mean for him? What role did he play in restoring this balance? How, he asked, his voice trembling with a mix of uncertainty and resolve. How can I restore the balance? What am I supposed to do? Lysandra smiled, but it was a smile filled with both sorrow and hope. You must listen to the ocean, Ethan. Trust in its rhythms. It will guide you. But you must also confront the darkness that lies beneath the surface. The forces of the ocean have been disturbed, corrupted by time and greed. The balance is fragile, and it will take everything you have to restore it. Ethan looked out at the vast expanse of the sea, his eyes drawn to the horizon where the water met the sky. The ocean stretched endlessly before him, its surface glimmering in the dawn light. He could feel it now, the pull, the weight of something deep and ancient calling him forward. He was no longer just a wanderer on an unknown island. He was a part of the ocean's story, a part of something much larger than himself. And whatever the ocean demanded of him, he would face it. He had no choice but to listen to its call. I'll do it, he said, his voice steady now, filled with purpose. I'll restore the balance. Lysandra nodded, her expression softening. Then we must go to the heart of the island. The ancient tide is strongest there. But beware, Ethan. The forces that stir beneath the waves are not easily tamed. You will face trials, darkness and chaos, but know this, you are not alone. The ocean is with you. It has always been with you. With those final words, she turned and began to walk toward the forest, her figure blending with the shadows of the trees. Ethan followed, the stone still pulsing in his hand, its light guiding him forward into the unknown. The air was thick with the scent of salt and earth as Ethan followed Lysandra deeper into the heart of the island. The early morning sun had risen fully, casting a soft golden light over the landscape. The island's dense forest, once mysterious and shadowed, now seemed to glow with a quiet energy, as though it were alive in a way he could not fully comprehend. Every step he took felt significant, as though the land itself was guiding him toward a greater purpose. Lysandra led him through the winding paths, her movements graceful and sure. Her presence was calming, yet there was a quiet urgency in her steps, a knowing that propelled her forward, even though she had not yet shared the full depth of the journey ahead. Ethan could sense that she was trying to prepare him for something, but what exactly, she had not yet revealed. Do you see the way the forest moves? Lysandra asked, her voice cutting through the stillness of the woods. Ethan glanced around, puzzled. The trees stood tall and silent, but as he looked closer, he noticed something subtle. The branches seemed to sway in a rhythm, not in the way the wind would cause them to move, but with a deliberate, almost orchestrated grace. "It's as if the trees themselves are alive," he said softly. "They are," Lysandra replied with a knowing smile. "The island is woven with the same currents that flow through the ocean, and its heart beats in time with the tides. The trees, the stones, the very air, all are part of the same rhythm. Everything here is interconnected, each part playing its role." Ethan felt a deepening sense of awe, realizing just how little he understood about the world around him. The island, the ocean, and the stone were all pieces of a larger puzzle, one that he had been unknowingly preparing to solve. Lysandra led him to a clearing, where a large, ancient tree stood at its center. Its trunk was thick and gnarled, and its roots stretched out like fingers, holding the earth in a tight embrace. At its base was a shallow pool of water, perfectly still, reflecting the sky above. The light from the sun shimmered on its surface, creating a mirror image that was almost surreal. "This is the heart of the island," Lysandra said quietly, as she knelt beside the pool. "Here, the forces of the ocean and the land meet. The heart beats with the rhythm of the tides, and the answers you seek are within it. But before you can restore the balance, you must first understand the path that lies ahead. And for that, you need the starry compass." Ethan blinked, confused. "The starry compass? What is that?" Lysandra smiled softly, reaching into the folds of her gown. From beneath her garments, she drew a small, delicate object, a compass, but unlike any he had seen before. It was made of a dark, smooth stone, with gold inlays that formed intricate patterns across its surface. At the center of the compass was a small, glowing gem, the same color as the ocean at twilight. "This is no ordinary compass," Lysandra explained, holding it out to Ethan. "It is a guide, a map of the stars, the tides, and the paths that lie beneath the surface. It will show you the way, but only if you are willing to trust it. You must look beyond the surface and see what is hidden in the currents of the world." Ethan reached out, taking the compass from Lysandra's hand. The moment his fingers brushed against it, he felt a surge of warmth, as though the compass had come to life in his palm. The gold inlays began to glow faintly, pulsing in time with his heartbeat, and the gem at its center flickered like a distant star. "Look closely," Lysandra urged. "Focus on the gem, and let the compass show you the way." Ethan's eyes were drawn to the glowing gem, and as he focused on it, he began to see faint lines of light radiating out from it, forming patterns that danced in the air. The lines seemed to twist and turn, shifting like the ocean's currents, but they were not random. They formed shapes, constellations, paths, maps of the sky and the sea. Ethan's heart quickened as he realized what he was seeing. "The compass, it's showing me the stars," he murmured. It's showing you the path that connects the heavens and the earth, Lysandra said. The stars guide the tides, and the tides guide the island. The compass will help you navigate both the land and the sea, but it requires more than just your eyes. It requires your heart. Trust it, and it will lead you to what you seek. Ethan's mind raced, but his hands were steady as he held the compass. The glowing lines grew brighter, more distinct, until they formed a pattern that stretched out before him, like a map to a distant destination. The compass pointed not just toward the horizon, but toward the very heart of the ocean. He looked up at Lysandra, his thoughts spinning. Where is this leading me? What is the starry compass showing me? It is showing you the way to the depths, Lysandra replied, her voice quiet but firm. The ocean holds the key to restoring balance, but the darkness that has corrupted it lies deep beneath the waves. The compass will guide you there, to the place where the ancient tides were disturbed. Ethan's heart tightened. He had felt the presence of something powerful in the depths of the ocean, something ancient and far-reaching. He had heard the whispers of the sea, but now, it seemed, he was being called to confront it directly. The darkness beneath the waves? Ethan repeated, his voice thick with uncertainty. What is it? Lysandra met his gaze, her expression solemn. It is the corruption of the natural order. It is what happens when the tides are manipulated for selfish gain, when the forces of nature are tampered with by those who seek to control them. The ancient tide is being disturbed, Ethan. And only you can set it right. Ethan's grip on the compass tightened. He knew, deep within himself, that the journey ahead would be perilous. But he also knew that he could not turn back. The ocean had chosen him, and the starry compass was his guide. The compass will lead you to the heart of the darkness, Lysandra continued. But you must be prepared. The path will not be easy. The trials will test your resolve, your courage, and your understanding of the balance between light and shadow. Trust the compass, trust the ocean, and trust yourself. Ethan took a deep breath and looked at the compass once more. The lines of light now formed a path that stretched toward the horizon, toward the deep, dark ocean where the balance of the world hung in the balance. The journey would be long, the trials intense, but Ethan was ready. He had no choice but to follow the compass, and to trust that it would lead him to the place where he could restore the ancient tide. With one last glance at Lysandra, he turned and began walking toward the boat, the compass glowing in his hand, his heart set on the unknown horizon. The boat rocked gently as Ethan set off once again, his eyes locked on the horizon where the ocean met the sky. The starry compass, still glowing softly in his hand, had already begun to pulse in rhythm with his heartbeat. The lines of light it cast into the air seemed to draw a path before him, twisting and turning, guiding him through the vast expanse of water. For the first time, the ocean no longer felt like an intimidating, endless expanse. It felt like something personal, something alive that was leading him toward an unknown destination. Lysandra had remained in the clearing, her part in the journey now complete. Her words lingered in Ethan's mind, a quiet reminder of what lay ahead. The darkness that had corrupted the tides, the trials he would face, the balance he had to restore. There was so much at stake. But more than anything, Ethan felt the call of the ocean itself. It whispered to him, softly at first, like a distant song carried on the wind. It was a beckoning, a promise of something deeper, something he had yet to understand. As the boat glided across the water, the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the ocean's surface. The starry compass flickered in response, its light pulsing faster now, as if it, too, sensed the approaching change. The calm waves began to shift in subtle ways, their rhythm growing more insistent. The wind, once soft and warm, had turned cooler, carrying with it the promise of something unknown, something hidden beneath the surface. Ethan held the compass tightly, his gaze fixed on the glowing path that stretched out before him. He could hear the faint whispers of the ocean in the back of his mind, like a soft, persistent murmur. At first, he thought it was just the wind, the waves lapping gently against the hull of the boat. But as the whispers grew clearer, he realized it was more than that. It was a voice from the depths of the sea, ancient and deep, resonating through the very water around him. It wasn't words, exactly, but a feeling, a knowing, a call that seemed to reverberate through his soul. Come closer, follow the path, the tide is waiting. The voice felt both familiar and alien, like the echo of a dream half remembered. It was soothing, but there was a sense of urgency in it, a need to be understood. Ethan closed his eyes, letting the whispers wash over him, feeling them vibrate within his chest. The starry compass pulsed in time with the rhythm of the ocean, its light growing brighter and more intense, guiding him forward. He didn't know how long he had been drifting, or how far he had traveled, but the air had changed, and the sea had taken on a new quality. The waves were no longer gentle, but had become more animated, moving with a purpose, swirling and cresting in patterns that were both beautiful and unsettling. The horizon ahead of him was darker now, the water deepening into a shade of blue that seemed to draw him in. The whispers grew louder, now more distinct, filling his thoughts with an almost overwhelming sense of clarity. The tide whispers to those who listen. Do you hear it? Do you understand? Ethan's heart beat faster as he focused on the voice. He had been following the compass without truly understanding the deeper meaning of the journey, but now, it felt as though the ocean itself was reaching out to him, guiding him towards something crucial, something that had been waiting beneath the waves. The boat glided forward with an almost uncanny precision, moving as if directed by the whispers themselves. Ethan's hand trembled slightly as he held the compass, but his mind was calm, his focus unwavering. He understood, in that moment, that the ocean was not just a force of nature, it was a living, breathing entity, and it was calling him to witness something far beyond his imagination. As the boat moved closer to the darker water, a shadow began to emerge in the distance. At first, it was just a shape on the horizon, barely visible against the backdrop of the setting sun. But as the boat drew nearer, the shadow took form, tall, jagged rocks rising from the water like ancient teeth, their outlines sharp against the fading light. The water around them churned with a strange energy, and the whispers grew more urgent, almost frantic. The heart of the ocean, the heart of the storm, you are close, Ethan. Come closer. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. This was it, the place the starry compass had been leading him toward. The shadows were not just rocks, they were a formation, an entrance, a gateway to something far deeper. He could feel it now, the presence of something vast and powerful, hidden beneath the waves, waiting to be discovered. The boat lurched slightly as it passed through the shadow of the rocks, the water now growing darker still. The ocean seemed to deepen around him, pulling him into its embrace, as if inviting him to dive into its depths. At that moment, the whispers grew louder, now unmistakable in their urgency. The voice came not from the water around him, but from within the very compass itself, its glow flickering with intensity. You must listen, Ethan. The ocean speaks, and its message is clear. You are the key to restoring the balance, but first, you must understand the ancient tide. You must listen to the tidal whisper. Suddenly, the water in front of him began to shift. The waves that had once been gentle now turned into a current, pulling the boat forward with growing speed. Ethan felt a surge of adrenaline as the boat sped up, the wind in his hair and the salty air stinging his skin. The current seemed to guide him, pushing him toward the heart of the storm, the place where the ocean's secrets lay buried. The whispers intensified, no longer soft murmurs, but a chorus of voices, all speaking at once. It was as if the entire ocean was speaking to him, each wave, each ripple carrying a message. The storm is not an enemy, Ethan. It is a part of the cycle. It is the cleansing, the rebirth. You must understand the tidal whisper, the storm before the calm. The boat seemed to race toward the heart of the storm, the water growing choppier, the wind howling in his ears. Ethan's heart pounded, but there was no fear. He knew, deep within him, that he was not alone. The ocean was with him. The whispers were guiding him. And then, in the midst of the chaos, there was silence. The boat came to a sudden stop. The water around him stilled, and the wind fell away, leaving only the sound of his own breathing. The sky above him was dark, the stars obscured by the clouds, but there was a stillness here that was both unsettling and awe-inspiring. Ethan looked around. He was no longer sure where he was, lost in the deep, at the center of the ocean's pulse, surrounded by the vast unknown. But he could feel the presence of something ancient, something waiting, just beneath the surface. The tidal whisper had led him here, and now he would learn its secrets. The silence was thick and suffocating, as though the entire ocean had held its breath in anticipation. Ethan sat perfectly still in the boat, the compass still glowing softly in his hand, its light flickering as though it, too, was waiting for something to happen. The air felt charged, electric with the presence of something ancient, something far older than the sea itself. The whispers had faded, leaving behind only the steady pulse of the ocean, but their message was clear. He was standing at the edge of something profound. For a long moment, the only sound was the faint lapping of the water against the boat, a soft, rhythmic pulse. Then, without warning, the water beneath him began to churn, and the boat began to drift forward, as if guided by an unseen force. The current, which had been pulling him before, now moved with purpose, tugging him toward an unknown destination. The air, once still, began to move again, growing colder as the boat picked up speed. Ethan gripped the sides of the boat, his heart racing. He had been expecting the storm, the tumult, the trials that Lysandra had spoken of, but this was different. The ocean was not angry, it was not chaotic. It was focused, deliberate, leading him somewhere. But where? As the boat continued to move through the darkened waters, the shadows that had once loomed ominously in the distance began to take shape. At first, they were just fleeting outlines, vague and indistinct, like ghostly silhouettes rising from the depths. But as they grew closer, they became clearer, more defined. The darkened water was now dotted with rocky outcrops, jagged and ancient, rising from the sea like teeth of some forgotten creature. Then, as though the ocean itself were parting to reveal a hidden secret, the boat passed between two large formations of rock, and the water ahead opened up into a vast cove. The sky above had grown darker still, the clouds swirling in unnatural patterns, but here, in this forgotten place, the air was still, and the water was calm. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as he looked around. Before him lay a shore unlike any he had seen, a shore that felt both familiar and utterly alien. The sand was black, fine as ash, and the air smelled faintly of salt and ancient wood. The cliffs that bordered the cove were covered in thick vines and moss, their faces eroded by time and tide. But what struck Ethan most was the sense of emptiness. There was no sign of life here, no animals, no birds, no sounds except the soft lapping of the waves. It was as though the shore had been forgotten by time itself. The boat drifted closer, the compass now glowing with an intense, steady light. Ethan felt drawn toward the shore, an irresistible pull, as though the island itself were calling him. The whispers had faded, replaced now by an almost deafening silence, broken only by the rhythmic pulse of the ocean. As the boat glided onto the black sand, the water receded, leaving the boat grounded in a shallow tide. Ethan slowly stood, stepping out onto the shore. He paused for a moment, looking back at the boat, then up at the looming cliffs that surrounded the cove. The shadows from the rock formations stretched long across the sand, and the air here felt dense with history, heavy with secrets waiting to be uncovered. Ethan could sense, deep within him, that this place was important in ways he could not yet understand. He took a deep breath, the salt-laden air filling his lungs. It was as if he had stepped into another world, a world where time did not flow in the same way, a world that held the echoes of something long forgotten. The compass pulsed once again, its light brightening, and Ethan felt a surge of certainty. This was where the balance was to be restored. This was where he would confront the forces that had disturbed the tides. But there was something else, something ancient, something that had been waiting here, hidden beneath the surface of the world, waiting for the right moment to be awakened. As he stepped forward, the sound of his footsteps crunching against the fine black sand seemed unusually loud in the stillness. The air around him began to hum with energy, a vibration that seemed to come from the very ground beneath his feet. The shoreline stretched before him, bordered by the towering cliffs on either side. But just ahead, at the center of the cove, a large stone structure stood, half hidden by overgrown vines and moss. It was shaped like a massive archway, a portal of sorts, carved from the rock itself, and its surface was covered in ancient symbols that seemed to pulse with the same rhythm as the compass in his hand. Ethan approached cautiously, the stone door now clearly visible in the dim light. The symbols etched into the rock glowed faintly, their light flickering like stars in the night sky, and as he drew closer, he could feel the pull of something greater, something powerful, at the heart of the archway. His hand reached out, drawn by an unseen force, and when his fingers touched the stone, a jolt of energy surged through him. The compass in his hand flared brightly, and for a brief moment, everything seemed to shimmer, as though time itself had stopped. The symbols on the archway began to glow more intensely, and the vibrations in the air grew stronger, almost unbearable. Then, with a sudden rush of sound, the stone archway shifted. The ground beneath him trembled, and the black sand seemed to shimmer, like waves rippling across the shore. The archway opened, revealing a dark passage beyond. The air that rushed out from the portal was cold, smelling of salt and ancient earth, carrying with it a deep, unsettling presence. Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. The way forward was clear now. The archway was not just a structure, it was a threshold, a passage to something beyond. Something lost to time, waiting to be awakened. This was the heart of the island, the forgotten shore, and beyond it lay the answers he had sought, the path that would restore balance to the ocean, the storm, and the tides. The time had come to enter. Taking a deep breath, Ethan stepped forward, crossing the threshold of the archway, and the darkness of the passage enveloped him, pulling him deeper into the heart of the island. The passage beyond the archway was dark, its air thick with the scent of earth and ancient stone. Ethan's footsteps echoed in the narrow, dimly lit corridor, the sound distorted by the weight of time pressing in from all sides. The stone walls seemed to pulse faintly with energy, as if they, too, were alive, breathing with a rhythm older than anything he had known. The further he walked, the more he felt the weight of the place, an ancient power, dormant for centuries, now stirring in response to his presence. The glow from the starry compass had intensified, casting a soft, ethereal light around him. The golden lines on its surface seemed to shift and change with every step he took, guiding him deeper into the darkness. Despite the oppressive silence, Ethan felt a sense of purpose, a quiet but undeniable pull, drawing him toward whatever awaited him at the end of this passage. The air grew cooler as he moved forward, the walls narrowing, until the corridor opened up into a vast chamber. The sight that greeted him took his breath away. Before him stood an immense underground cavern, its high ceiling lost in shadows. The walls of the cavern were slick with moisture, covered in strange, glowing symbols that seemed to flicker and dance in the darkness. But what caught his attention the most was the massive body of water stretching out before him. A deep, black pool, its surface still and smooth, reflecting the light from the compass like a mirror. At the center of the pool, there was a shape, an enormous, ancient structure, half submerged in the water. It resembled a ruined temple or a forgotten altar, its broken stone pillars reaching up toward the cavern's ceiling like the bones of some long-dead creature. The temple's stone surface was covered in moss and seaweed, as if the ocean itself had reclaimed it over time. And yet, despite the decay, there was an undeniable sense of reverence here, as though this place held something sacred. Ethan felt the pull again, stronger now, urging him toward the water. He stepped forward, the sound of his footsteps muffled by the soft earth beneath his boots. As he drew closer to the edge of the pool, the water began to stir, rippling gently as if responding to his presence. The starry compass, held tightly in his hand, grew even brighter, its golden light illuminating the symbols on the cavern walls. The whispers, too, began to return, soft at first, like the rustle of wind through leaves. Then, as the water shifted, the whispers grew louder, rising from the depths of the pool, filling his ears with their haunting cadence. The tides call, the time is now. Ethan crouched at the edge of the water, his breath quickening as the surface of the pool shimmered with an ethereal glow. The whispers seemed to be coming from the depths themselves, and Ethan realized with a shiver that they weren't just words, they were feelings, ancient emotions embedded in the very water, reaching up to him like the ghosts of the past. The sea waits. The compass pulsed, and the light it cast flickered as though responding to the call. Ethan closed his eyes for a moment, letting the vibrations of the whispers seep into his bones. He had come this far. He had followed the path of the starry compass, listened to the tides, and braved the forgotten shore. Now, it was time to face whatever lay beneath the surface of the water. It was time to awaken the sea. As his fingers brushed the surface of the water, a shock of cold shot through him, sending a jolt of energy up his arm. The pool rippled violently, and the light from the compass exploded in a burst of golden energy, casting long, shifting shadows across the cavern. The stone walls seemed to vibrate with power as the water turned and swirled, rising up in a spiral like a whirlpool. For a moment, everything was chaos, water, light, sound, and shadow blending together into a dizzying vortex. But then, as quickly as it had begun, the swirling water stopped. The pool stilled once more, but this time it was different. At the center of the water, a figure emerged, slowly, deliberately, as though rising from the very depths of time itself. It was massive, its form shifting in the water like a great leviathan, its body covered in scales that shimmered with the colors of the ocean, deep blues, emerald greens, and iridescent purples. Its eyes were wide and ancient, glowing with a light that seemed to pierce through Ethan's soul. It was not just a creature of the sea, it was the sea, a manifestation of the very forces that controlled the tides, the storms, and the currents. Ethan stood frozen, mesmerized by the sight before him. The creature did not speak in words, but in waves, its presence resonating deep within him, sending a hum of understanding through his body. The air around him seemed to vibrate with ancient power, and in that moment, Ethan understood he was standing before the heart of the ocean itself. The creature's movements were slow but deliberate, as though it were acknowledging his presence. It circled him once, its eyes never leaving his face, and Ethan felt as though the entire ocean was watching him, waiting for him to act. The balance has been disturbed. The whisper came again, clearer now, as if the ocean itself was speaking through the creature. Ethan swallowed, his throat dry, but his voice was steady when he spoke. "I've come to restore the balance. I have come to hear the call of the tides." The creature's eyes glowed brighter, and Ethan could feel its ancient energy swirling around him, an overwhelming presence that made him feel both small and infinitely connected to the vastness of the world. The creature's form shifted again, and the water around it began to glow with a deep blue light. Ethan felt the ground beneath him vibrate with power, and then, just as suddenly as the stirring had begun, the pool went still. The creature's form began to fade, slowly sinking back into the depths from which it had emerged. As it disappeared beneath the water, a final whisper echoed through the cavern, filling Ethan's mind with a singular message. "The tides are awake, Ethan. The sea is calling you to restore what was lost." For a long moment, Ethan stood at the edge of the pool, his mind racing with what he had just witnessed. The awakening of the sea, the presence of the ocean itself, was unlike anything he had ever imagined. The force he had felt, the understanding that had passed between him and the ancient creature, was something primal, something beyond human comprehension. But now, the next part of the journey was clear. The balance could only be restored by understanding the depths of the ocean's heart, and by confronting whatever lay within those depths. He turned and began to walk toward the edge of the cavern, the starry compass glowing brighter in his hand, its light now a steady beacon guiding him forward. The awakening of the sea was only the beginning. The true challenge lay ahead, in the heart of the ocean where the balance had been lost. And Ethan knew, deep within his soul, that he was the one chosen to restore it. The air in the cavern was thick with the aftermath of the awakening. Ethan's mind was still reeling from the encounter with the ancient sea creature. The whispers had faded, but their message lingered in his thoughts, like the echo of a distant song that refused to be forgotten. He knew now that his journey was far from over. The balance of the ocean had been disturbed, and it was up to him to restore it. But the path forward remained shrouded in mystery, and the waters before him were still, waiting for the next step to unfold. Ethan stood at the edge of the pool, the starry compass in his hand, its steady glow casting soft reflections on the water's surface. The cavern around him was silent, the only sound the faint drip of water from the cavern's ceiling. He took a deep breath and turned, heading toward the narrow passageway that led him deeper into the heart of the island. The walls of the passage seemed to close in around him, the air growing cooler with each step he took. He couldn't shake the feeling that the island itself was watching him, that the very stones and waters were alive, aware of his presence. The passage twisted and turned, and as he ventured further, a strange sense of unease began to creep into his chest. It was as if something was waiting for him, something ancient, something that had been here long before him. And then, as if summoned by the tension in the air, a sound broke the silence. It was distant at first, like the mournful creak of wood, but it grew louder with each passing moment, carried on the currents of the air. Ethan's steps slowed, his heart quickening in his chest as the sound grew clearer, like the groaning of a ship's timbers, the whisper of sails flapping in the wind. The passage began to widen, and before him, through the darkness, he saw a faint light. The glow of it was dim but steady, like the lanterns of a ship at sea. Ethan's instinct screamed at him to stop, but he couldn't. The light was like a beacon, drawing him in, urging him toward it. He moved faster, the rhythmic sound of the creaking wood growing louder, closer. As he turned the final bend in the passage, he stepped out into an open space, another cavern, much larger than the first. Before him, standing tall and ghostly in the dim light, was a ship. But it was no ordinary ship. It was a spectral vessel, its sails tattered and torn, its hull creaking as though caught in the grip of an eternal storm. The ship glowed faintly with an eerie light, casting long, twisted shadows across the cavern walls. It was the ghost ship, the vessel of the lost souls, the one that had been waiting in the depths, forgotten by time but never truly gone. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he stepped closer. The ship seemed to shimmer in the stillness, its outlines shifting as if it were made of mist rather than wood. The sails hung lifeless, but they rustled in the wind that seemed to come from nowhere, moving with a strange, mournful rhythm. The sound of the creaking timbers echoed through the cavern, a reminder of the ship's age and its eternal journey through forgotten waters. The air around the ship was thick with a sense of unease. It felt wrong, out of place. Yet there was a strange pull, a curiosity that urged Ethan forward. He stepped closer to the ship, his breath coming in shallow gasps. As he reached the gangplank, his hand hovered above the rotting wood, hesitant but compelled to touch it. The moment his fingers brushed the surface, the ship seemed to come alive with a sudden, low hum. The sails fluttered slightly, and a whisper filled the air, a voice, or perhaps many voices, speaking in unison, distant and haunting. "Come aboard, come aboard, the journey is not yet over." Ethan's blood ran cold as the whisper echoed in his mind. It wasn't just a voice, it was a call, one that had been waiting for someone to answer it. A call from the depths, from the long-forgotten corners of the world. The voices seemed to swirl around him, growing louder and more insistent, each word tinged with sorrow and longing. "The tides have shifted, the storm is coming, the sea will rise." Without thinking, Ethan stepped onto the ship, his boots creaking on the old wooden planks as he crossed the gangplank. The moment he set foot on board, the temperature dropped, and the air thickened with a cold, salty fog. The ship seemed to respond, as though recognizing his presence, its ghostly glow flickering in time with the pulse of the starry compass. He looked around, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. The deck was deserted, save for the remnants of the past, broken ropes, splintered wood, and rusted chains hanging from the masts. The ship's wheel stood at the center, unmoving, as though it hadn't been touched in centuries. The sails, though torn, hung limply against the masts, as if awaiting the wind that would never come. Ethan moved toward the wheel, his steps slow and deliberate. As his hand grasped the cold, damp wood, the ship groaned in response. A sudden gust of wind filled the sails, though there was no breeze to be felt. The ghost ship began to stir, the sails catching the unseen wind, the deck vibrating beneath Ethan's feet. He stepped back, eyes wide. The ship was alive, somehow it was alive, and it was waiting for him. He could feel the weight of its history, the sorrow of its journey, the countless souls who had sailed its ghostly waters. And yet, there was something more, something tied to the storm that was brewing outside, something that had been lost in the deep and was now calling him to find it. The voices on the ship grew louder, their whispers now clearer, more urgent. The storm will awaken what lies beneath, the sea is calling, the time has come to face the past. Ethan's hand trembled as he gripped the starry compass, its light brightening in response to the voices. The ship seemed to pulse with energy, its presence heavy in the cavern. He knew now that this was no ordinary ship, it was a part of the ocean's history, a lost relic of a time when the sea was at its most powerful, and the forces that had shaped the tides had yet to be understood. The ghost ship had risen from the depths for a reason. It had come to guide him, to help him understand the true nature of the storm, and the ancient forces that had disturbed the balance of the seas. And now, Ethan understood his role. The journey had only just begun. The ship was his to command, and the sea had awakened him to the truth. He was not just a traveler, he was a part of something much greater, something that had been waiting for him to return. As the ship began to move, Ethan turned toward the horizon that lay ahead. The storm was coming, and with it, the final confrontation that would decide the fate of the ocean and of the world. The ghost ship groaned beneath Ethan's feet as the unseen wind filled its tattered sails, propelling the spectral vessel forward. The air around him seemed to hum with anticipation, the silence of the cavern broken only by the creaking timbers of the ship and the eerie sound of distant waves crashing against unseen shores. The compass in Ethan's hand pulsed with a steady glow, its light reflecting off the black, glass-like waters below. He stood at the wheel, his hands gripping the cold wood, and for a moment, everything felt surreal. He had boarded the ghost ship, a vessel that had seemingly been lost to time, a ship that was both a relic and a living entity, with a purpose that called to him from the deepest reaches of the ocean. It was as though the ship itself had a soul, one that was tied to the rhythms of the tides, the storms, and the sea's ancient power. The whispers that had filled the air earlier had quieted for a moment, replaced by the low, mournful hum of the ship's movement through the water. But even in the stillness, Ethan could feel that something was shifting in the world around him. The wind, though absent until now, was returning, slowly, imperceptibly at first, but it was there. He could feel the stirring of it, the breath of the ocean filling the sails. A chill ran down his spine. The wind was more than just a breeze, it was the return of something long lost. The storm that had been brewing for so long was finally reaching its apex, and with it, the ancient forces of the sea were awakening, rising to meet him. Ethan turned the wheel, adjusting the course, as the cavern ahead grew darker still. He had no map, no guide, only the steady pull of the starry compass and the whispers of the ghost ship to lead him. The cavern walls seemed to close in, the ceiling so high above that it was lost in shadow, and yet he felt as though the very rock itself was listening, reacting to the ship's movements. And then, a distant sound broke through the stillness, a rumble, deep and resonant, like thunder rolling beneath the earth. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, resonating through the bones of the ghost ship and the very air around him. The rumble seemed to stir something deep within Ethan, a primal sense that something was coming, something vast and powerful. The wind picked up, swirling around the ship as though in response to the approaching storm. The sails snapped taut, the ship's bow cutting through the water with newfound urgency. It was as though the ship itself recognized the presence of the storm, and its energy surged in response, urging Ethan to press forward. The rumbling grew louder, closer, until it was no longer distant thunder, but the sound of the storm's arrival. The air around him grew heavy with moisture, and the temperature dropped. Ethan's breath misted in front of him as he steadied the wheel, his eyes scanning the horizon. The water ahead began to roil, dark waves cresting with a power that seemed to come from the very depths of the ocean. Suddenly, a gust of wind hit with force, throwing Ethan back. The sails billowed, snapping like the crack of a whip, and the ghost ship surged forward, its spectral presence now fully awakened. The wind held in the rigging, a wild, unrestrained force that swept through the ship, filling the air with the sound of 1,000 voices calling in unison. The once still sea exploded into motion as the wind, like a spirit long imprisoned, was finally freed. Ethan steadied himself, his heart pounding in his chest as the ship rode the rising waves. The storm had come, just as the whispers had foretold, and the ocean had awakened. But this was not just a storm, it was a reckoning. The forces that had been disturbed were now in motion, and Ethan could feel their power, their presence, swelling around him. As the ship cut through the waves, the wind began to howl, louder and louder. The once calm waters of the cavern were transformed into a churning, frothy sea. The ghost ship groaned under the pressure, its timbers straining as the storm raged around it. The waves rose higher, crashing against the sides of the ship, but the vessel seemed to glide effortlessly over them, as though it were born of the very forces that controlled the tides. Ethan clung to the wheel, his knuckles white, as he fought to keep control. The storm was relentless, and the ship seemed to have a mind of its own, its movements sure and steady despite the fury of the wind and sea. But as the storm intensified, so did the whispers, rising in volume, swirling around him, a chorus of voices calling from the depths. The time has come, the storm will bring the truth, follow the wind. The voices echoed in his mind, their words unclear but filled with a sense of urgency. The starry compass pulsed in his hand, its glow brighter than ever before, as if guiding him towards something far beyond the ship and the storm. Ethan knew he had to follow the wind, follow the forces that had awakened within the sea, if he was to restore the balance and uncover the truth that had been hidden for so long. The storm reached its peak, the wind howling and the waves crashing against the ghost ship's sides. But in the midst of the chaos, Ethan saw something ahead, a light, faint but unmistakable, shining through the storm. It was a beacon, and he knew instinctively that it was calling to him. With the wind at his back and the storm at its height, Ethan steered the ship toward the light, his heart racing with a mixture of fear and determination. The ship responded to his touch, its course steady as the storm raged on around them. The sea, the wind, and the ship seemed to be one now, a unified force moving as though they shared the same purpose. The light ahead grew brighter, its glow cutting through the dark, storm-choked air like a star in the blackened sky. And as Ethan sailed toward it, he knew that the storm was not just a natural occurrence, it was a test, a trial that would reveal the truth of the sea, the source of the disturbance, and the balance that had been lost. The wind roared in his ears as the ghost ship surged forward, its sails taut with energy. The storm had returned, and with it, the ocean was calling Ethan to fulfill his destiny. The storm raged for what felt like hours, but Ethan, now more attuned to the ship's rhythms, held fast to the wheel. The wind held through the rigging, and the waves surged around him with an untamed fury, but the ghost ship seemed to glide effortlessly through the chaos, as if it had always belonged to the storm. Every twist of the wheel, every shift of the sail felt like a dance, a synchronization of power and purpose that transcended mere human control. The compass pulsed steadily in his hand, its golden light brightening with each passing minute. The light ahead, the beacon in the heart of the storm, grew stronger, more defined. It was no longer just a distant glimmer, it had become a powerful, almost magnetic force, pulling the ship forward with an undeniable force. The whispering voices from the depths had quieted, and now there was only the sound of the wind, the creaking of the ship, and the steady rush of the water beneath them. But as they neared the light, something incredible began to happen. The storm that had torn the sea apart started to wane. The howling wind began to soften, the crashing waves slowed to gentle swells, and the darkness that had enveloped the cavern started to recede. It was as if the very air had shifted, the chaos giving way to a calm that felt almost surreal. The ship, though still moving forward with purpose, began to glide more smoothly, the eerie glow of the compass now perfectly in sync with the peaceful transition around him. Ethan stood at the helm, stunned by the sudden calm that had descended upon the ship. The storm that had been so violent and unrelenting had vanished as suddenly as it had come, leaving only an open expanse before him. The sky, once shrouded in thick clouds and tumultuous winds, was now clear and still, a soft, pastel twilight stretching across the horizon. The water, once churning and dark, had smoothed into a serene expanse of glassy blue, reflecting the sky above like a perfect mirror. The light he had been following was no longer just a distant beacon, it was the horizon itself. The storm had led him to a place beyond the reach of the turbulent waters, a place of balance, where the restless tides met the calm of the sky. As the ghost ship sailed toward the horizon, Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of peace wash over him. The ship, once so filled with the intensity of the storm, now seemed to be in perfect harmony with its surroundings. The air was warm and soft, and the sea, though vast and infinite, felt as though it had finally found its equilibrium. The quiet was profound. Ethan had never known such stillness, no waves crashing, no wind howling. The ocean, for the first time in his journey, felt content, as though it had been waiting for this moment for an eternity. The ship moved gently forward, the sails now billowing lazily in the soft breeze, catching the wind like a ship on a perfect summer afternoon. The starry compass in his hand continued to glow, but its light had softened, its golden hue now a soothing, steady pulse, as though the storm had cleansed it of all its previous tension. The ship's timbers creaked not with strain, but with the gentle song of wood long accustomed to the rhythm of the tides. Ethan took a deep breath, his mind still racing to understand what had just transpired. The storm had been more than a simple tempest, it had been a test, a purification, a force of nature that had been tied to something deeper than just the weather. It had been the final awakening of the sea, and in its wake, he was left with a profound sense of purpose. As he looked out over the calm waters, he saw something on the horizon, a faint silhouette. It was a landmass, rising from the sea like a distant dream. The island that he had been searching for, the place that held the answers he had been seeking, was finally within reach. The light that had guided him through the storm was now the light of truth, illuminating the path forward. He gripped the wheel with newfound determination, a sense of resolution settling in his chest. The journey had brought him here, but the final piece of the puzzle was still waiting. The balance of the sea had been disturbed, and Ethan knew that his role in restoring it was far from over. But now, he had a sense of clarity, a feeling that the tides were aligning, that the path ahead was leading him to the heart of the ocean, where the balance could finally be restored. As the ship glided forward, the peaceful horizon before him seemed to beckon, and he knew that this was the calm before the final reckoning. The storm had passed, but the journey was far from complete. The ghost ship sailed on, its course steady, its purpose clear. And as Ethan stood at the helm, he felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for the ocean that had carried him this far, and for the peaceful horizon that awaited him at the end of the journey. The horizon ahead was a blur of light and color, as though the very sky was meeting the sea in an eternal embrace. The ghost ship moved toward it with purpose, its sails now full of a soft, steady wind that guided them forward with a gentle grace. Ethan stood at the wheel, his fingers wrapped around the smooth wood, his mind calm and focused as he watched the shore that was slowly taking shape before him. The journey that had begun with uncertainty, with chaos, was now drawing to its final chapter. The journey had not been easy. He had sailed through tempests and quiet caverns, faced storms both literal and metaphorical, and uncovered secrets that had been buried beneath the waves for centuries. But now, as the ship glided steadily toward the island, Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of peace, peace not just from the calm waters and the gentle winds, but from the understanding that his role in this grand, ancient story was nearing completion. As the shore grew closer, the ghost ship's sails fluttered in the wind, like a bird gliding toward its destination. The ship had been his companion through it all, its presence both haunting and reassuring. He could feel the connection between himself and the ship, as though they were both part of the same force, bound to the ocean's pulse and rhythm. The island before him was unlike any place he had seen before. It rose from the sea like a myth, a place that seemed to exist between the worlds, where the waters met the sky in a perfect balance. The cliffs that bordered the shore were covered in lush, green foliage, and the air seemed to shimmer with the promise of ancient secrets. It was a land that had been untouched by time, hidden away in the heart of the sea, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Ethan's breath caught in his chest as the ghost ship approached the shore. He could feel the pull of the island, an undeniable call that resonated deep within him. The ship's sails began to flutter more rapidly, as if responding to the island's magnetic force, and the ship's course seemed to adjust on its own. It was as though the island had been waiting for them, waiting for him. As the ship drew closer to the island's shore, the once clear sky darkened slightly, and a soft mist began to rise from the water, swirling around the ship. The air grew thick with the scent of salt and earth, and Ethan could hear the soft, rhythmic lapping of the waves against the ship's hull. The ghost ship slowed, its sails now still as it approached the shore. The calm before the storm had returned, but this time it felt different. It felt final. The ship came to a gentle stop at the water's edge, its bow barely touching the sand, as though it had finally found its home. Ethan stood still for a moment, taking in the island's beauty, the feeling of finality in the air. The time for action was over. Now, it was time for reflection. As he stepped off the ship and onto the sandy shore, the soft crunch of the sand beneath his boots was the only sound in the stillness. The island felt ancient, alive with memories of times long past. He could almost hear the whispers of the sea, carried on the wind, and he knew that the balance of the ocean had been restored. The starry compass in his hand had dimmed to a soft glow, its purpose fulfilled. The whispers from the depths had stopped, the storm had passed, and the ocean had found its peace. Ethan turned to look back at the ghost ship, its spectral form now blending with the mist rising from the sea. It was a vessel of the past, a ship that had carried him through trials and revelations, but its journey was over. It had guided him here, to this moment, and now it would fade into the ocean's eternal memory. Ethan smiled softly to himself, his heart full of gratitude. He had come seeking answers, and though the answers had not always been clear or easy to understand, he had found something greater, the knowledge that the sea was not just a force of nature, but a living entity, one that had its own rhythms, its own wisdom. He had learned to listen to its call, to follow its guidance, and in doing so, he had discovered the balance that had been lost so long ago. The island before him was the heart of that balance, a place where the sea and sky met in perfect harmony. He could feel the energy of the island vibrating through the ground, the air, and the water. It was a sacred place, a place of peace, and Ethan knew that it was here, at the end of his journey, that the ocean's true story would be told. With a final glance at the ghost ship, now fading into the mist, Ethan began to walk inland. The path before him was clear, lined with trees whose leaves shimmered with a soft, silver light. The island seemed to beckon him forward, and he knew that he was not leaving anything behind. Instead, he was stepping into a new chapter, one that he would write in harmony with the ocean, with the world around him. The storm had passed, the wind had returned, and the balance had been restored. Ethan was no longer just a traveler on the sea, he had become a part of its endless journey. The ocean was vast, its mysteries boundless, but now he understood that its power lay not in its tempestuous storms, but in its quiet, unyielding peace. And as he walked deeper into the heart of the island, a soft wind carried a final whisper to his ears, a whisper not of the past, but of the future. The journey is never truly over. The sea calls to those who listen.